Good morning, everybody. We're going to kick it off because we've got an exciting morning in front of us. My name is Woody Kingman, and I am proud to represent the Alumni Board and the Office of Institutional Advancement, which sponsors these events known as Breakfast at Blake. Before we hear from today's speaker, I just want to remind you of a couple of fun events. Hopefully you all this fall read your alumni events booklet that came out in the mail, and of course we'll be in touch with you through the internet and emails and all. But two items coming up: the annual alumni hockey games will be on December 23rd in the newly renovated hockey rink. So come for the hockey, come for the new architecture and the new rink, which looks great. And then after Christmas, on December 28th, we're going to have the annual alumni party over at the Northrop campus. So hope you'll join us at those events. And then in January, we're going to kick off Breakfast at Blake with a former Blake trustee and parent, Kate Mortensen, who's going to speak about her role in organizing and bringing the NCAA basketball Final Four tournament to the Twin Cities. And then in February, we're going to hear from Jeffrey Jones, Blake parent, who's going to talk to us about his experiences as Chief Marketing Officer at Target and Uber, and now as his new role as CEO of H&R Block. We got him to get away from the tax season to come and talk to us, so that'll be neat. Well, this morning, as part of the Northrop and Blake Classes of 1955 Speaker Series, we have the pleasure of hearing from Eboo Patel. And I am assuming that most of you read a little bit about him in the announcements, so I am not going to go into his background. What I am going to do is tie this speaker today into Breakfast at Blake. And that is, a few years ago, you may remember that we had Jim Cornelius here, class of 1977, and Jim is the executive director of the Lincoln Museum in Springfield, Illinois. And some of you may have heard, as I did last night as I was getting into bed, that the Gettysburg Address, the original copy, has been put on display because, as we learned in Blake history, Northrop history, the Blake School's history classes, that the 272-word address was given on November 19th of 1863. So the address is on display, taken out of the vault, on display at the museum this week. And a few years ago, there was a book, a compilation of essays about the Gettysburg Address that was put together. The person behind it asked everyone to write their response or their ideas about the Gettysburg Address in 272 words or less. And I want to read the first paragraph that Eboo wrote when he responded to and gave his thoughts about the Gettysburg Address. This was the first country to believe people from the four corners of the earth, people who spoke different languages, people who prayed to God in different ways, could come together and build a nation. Partnerships forged here between those who might have warred elsewhere would not only strengthen the new nation, but might help ease discord on other soil. In a world where people from different backgrounds were too often at one another's throats, America would exemplify pluralism. Here to share thoughts like that with us today, Eboo Patel.
That was going to be the first paragraph of my talk this morning. Boy, I've loved being with your community these last 24 hours. There's a great line by the Black scholar and religious figure Howard Thurman. He says of his own alma mater, Morehouse, he says, "It felt like my school put a crown above my head and inspired me to achieve it." And just spending time with your students yesterday and the faculty and folks like Marie and Ann, it's just been powerful. Like you get a sense that Blake, Northrop, this set of institutions puts a crown above young people's heads and says, we expect you to get there. You don't think you can right now, but we expect you to get there. So thank you for letting me be a part of that for 48 hours. So what I want to talk about this morning is it's a little bit on that theme, Woody. Thank you. Although at a micro level, right? Not at the macro level of a nation, but at the micro level of basically how do you build spaces where it is easier for people to cooperate? Which is something that teachers here, the principals here, the staff here, they do all the time, right? But to maybe articulate it as kind of a philosophical principle or a philosophical challenge, how do you create spaces where it is easier for people to cooperate? People of a variety of identities who in other contexts might actually be at each other's throats. What does it mean to create a space where they can learn together, where they can enrich one another, where they can challenge one another? So I have a 7 and a 10-year-old, and I see this on a relatively regular basis with them. So I'll just tell kind of one quick story about my 7-year-old. So this year, first year he's in summer camp for much of the summer, day camp, and we're looking at the list of kids and families who are sending their kids to this summer camp, and he's like, oh no, these 3 kids are mean, right? They're mean. And my youngest kid has a little bit of anxiety, and so we have to kind of talk him into going to camp that first Monday morning. And he comes back Monday afternoon, looks happy as a clam. And I was like, Khalil, what happened? What happened with these 3 kids? And he was like, oh, they were really nice. They were really nice. So what is it about the school situation in which those kids are mean and the camp situation in which those kids are nice? Do you see what I mean? In other words, in many, many cases, meanness or niceness is not an innate quality of a human being. It is a situational expression. And I would like to think that that has an awful lot to do with the people who create the situation. Schools don't fall from the sky, people build them. Classrooms don't fall from the sky, people shape them. Summer camps don't fall from the sky, people create them. You can design a situation in which it is easier for people from a range of identities and backgrounds, a range of expressions and views, a range of inclinations, where it is easier for people to cooperate. So here's one of the first times this occurs to me. This is the other experience of being at a school for me, is I remember when I was 8 or 9 years old, and in any social situation, there's the inner ring, as C.S. Lewis called it, and then there's the outer ring, and then maybe there's kind of a third circle, and then there was me, and some orbit many universes away, right? And one day, when I'm 8 or 9 years old, growing up in the western suburbs of Chicago, where I am very, very different, I get an invitation to Steve or Brian's birthday party, and I am ecstatic. I have secretly believed that Brian, who is very much part of the inner ring, has secretly wanted to be friends with me, and just didn't know it until the week of that invitation. Now that I'm a parent, I know exactly how this works. It's some version of, Zaid, if you don't invite that kid to your birthday party, you will not be having a birthday party. But back then, I thought Brian secretly wanted to be friends with me. So the Sunday morning of the Sunday afternoon party rolls along, and my mom looks at the invitation that she has put on the fridge with a magnet, and turns out that Brian's mom or Steve's mom, whose parents are going to be making hot dogs at home as the snack or the meal that evening. This was before the days of creating carnivals for your kids' birthday parties, right? This is back when mac and cheese and hot dogs would do. And because we're Muslim and don't eat pork, and because my mother was at that point, too much of an immigrant, frankly, to call Steve's mom and say, what kind of hot dogs are you cooking up? She hands me, on the way to Steve's birthday party, a clear plastic bag with 2 Vienna beef hot dogs. I was like, first you named me Eboo. I mean, seriously? I'm 9 years old, it's June. You know how awkward it is to try to hide 2 hot dogs on your person as a 9-year-old boy in June? But here I am, like this dutiful, 9-year-old, second generation Indian Muslim kid going to Steve's birthday party with my 2 Vienna beef hot dogs, right? And, when you grow up like that, you got to be creative. And so somehow I find a way to hide this food on my person without being too noticeable. And whenever we're done with the first set of games or whatever it is that we do, and it's snack time, I find a way to sneak into the kitchen so that I can get my hot dogs cooked up in, as my mother put it, an unporked pan. And I find a dark corner from which I'm going to make my foray to Steve's parents to make my request, and there's another kid in the corner. I look at him. He's got a little plastic bag with hot dogs, and I'm like, say, man, are you Muslim? He's like, no, my name's Chaim, I'm Jewish. My mom sent me with these. I'm like, I have no idea what Jewish is, but you and me, we are going to be friends. Right? So, I didn't think this at the time. Honestly, I was 9 years old, right? But there are plenty of encounters in which Jews and Muslims first meet, and their first instinct is we're not going to be friends, right? So here was a space in which, frankly, our important commonality mattered more than whatever differences diaspora communities might have had. And I relate that an awful lot to what Khalil said to me, which is that was a situation in which it was more likely for us to feel friendship, to cooperate. What does it mean to create spaces where it is more likely for people from diverse backgrounds to work together, to learn together? I think that this is one of the great opportunities of a school. It is hard to do this on a national level, right? But it's the kind of thing a school, an athletic team, a summer camp can do. You can take 30 kids from very different backgrounds and you can design situations in which they are more likely to learn from each other. There's actually an awful lot of research on this in the field of social psychology. I'll cite a couple of studies that at least I found especially interesting. So one is a study by a man named Muzaffar Sharif, and it's called the Robber's Cave Experiment. Anybody know this or remember this? So it's actually a summer camp experiment with 12-year-old boys. And Sharif and his research colleagues take a group of 12-year-old boys to a summer camp in Kansas called Robber's Cave. And they split them up into 2 groups. And these 2 groups of 12-year-old boys, like almost immediately start articulating what can, I think, only be called kind of tribal identities for their groups. So they name their groups, the Eagles and the Rattlers. They give their groups flags and chants and songs and signs. They're like developing these deep identities as Eagles and Rattlers. And then Sharif and his colleagues design a set of activities that are meant to create friction between these groups. So, for example, they say that there's a pizza party on Wednesday night. They tell the Eagles the pizza party starts at 5:30 and the Rattlers it starts at 5:45. I don't know how many of you have experienced with 12-year-old boys, but can you imagine how much pizza is left when the Rattlers show up at 5:45? So, there's physical confrontation that takes place. And as I'm reading this study, I'm thinking to myself, you have created situations where these kids are more likely to be at each other's throats. The following week, they create a whole different set of activities. They do things like put these kids on a bus to the swimming hole and have the driver drive the bus into a ditch. And the counselors say the only way we're going to get this bus out of the ditch is if everybody works together. So a set of activities that effectively requires the Eagles and the Rattlers to cooperate. And they watch the attitudes and the relationships and the affect change. Again, this is exactly how classroom environments and summer camps work. You can design a set of activities in which people from different backgrounds have their divisions and their differences widened, or you can design a set of activities in which people from different backgrounds have their inspiring commonality is the most salient. So probably the single most famous study about this was done by Philip Zimbardo. It's called the Stanford Prison Experiment. People familiar with this one? So I actually saw this film strip in high school. So I was the same age when as your upper school students that I spoke with yesterday. So what Zimbardo does is he takes two groups. He takes a group of 18, 19-year-old psychologically healthy, puts them through a battery of tests, young men in the Bay Area. This is in the 50s or 60s. And he assigns them the role of prisoner or guard randomly. So 10 of these healthy 19-year-olds, many of them are Stanford and Berkeley students on summer break. 10 of these 19-year-olds are randomly assigned to be guards, and 10 of them are randomly assigned to be prisoners. And he creates a simulated prison. I think he converts a school. This, by the way, was back before the time of research permissions for things, right? Because the stuff that he does should not have been done. And he watches, he and his colleagues are on the observation deck on the second floor, and he basically watches what a day ago was a group of 19-year-old guys who should have been playing ultimate frisbee with each other begin to fulfill the role of prisoner and guard. And so the prisoners act like prisoners. A set of the guards become more and more sadistic. A set of prisoners become scared and meek and start falling into themselves. A couple of the guards take advantage of that. It is a crazy situation that he sees unfolding before him. I met Zimbardo 6 or 7 years ago, and I mentioned to him just how struck I was by watching this film trip as a 16-year-old and how it made me reflect on we can create situations in which supposedly normal 19-year-olds act in terrible ways, right? And he says, I have a story for you that shows just how powerful situations are on our behavior. So at the time, he was a junior professor at Stanford, and his girlfriend was a graduate student, now his wife. And they had a date that Thursday night. And he said, look, my experiment runs till 10 o'clock, and so I can't go for a slice of pizza until then. Why don't you come by at 8:30 or 9 and watch the last hour or so of this experiment? Again, like I said, this is like before the age of having to get permission to do this. This is not only have you created a sadistic simulation, you're now inviting your girlfriend to come watch it, right? So anyway, he's upstairs on the second floor of this observation deck, and his girlfriend is with him, and he's like, okay, it's 9:06, lights out is 9:10. The guards are going to lead the prisoners around the corner. Prisoner number 4 has started to get shakes because he's so scared in this situation. Guard number 5 really hates prisoner number 4, so he ridicules him whenever he gets the shakes. Watch this, it's going to happen. Watch this, it's going to happen. And sure enough, a couple minutes later, the guards and the prisoners come around the corner, and that's precisely what takes place. And Zimbardo's telling me the story. He's like, my girlfriend at one point looks at me, and she's like, Phil, that's not a prisoner, that's a kid. Phil, you're not a prison warden, you're a professor. So what happened? Phil Zimbardo designed a prison simulation as a research experiment, and it was so powerful he fell into it himself. That's how powerful situations are and how we behave, right? I began my career as a teacher, and what always struck me was there would be some kid who was like a devil in his 3rd period class and an angel in 7th period. Same kid. I mean, I imagine lunch had something to do with that, right? But what is it about the situation that guides behavior in one way or another? And again, this is why it's such a remarkable opportunity to build pluralism at a school. Because you have an environment with kids from all of these different backgrounds who, in a range of other kinds of situations in the city or elsewhere in the world, might in fact think that their identities are barriers of division or even bludgeons of domination. But in your class, in your school, with the activities you do, with the tone that you set, you can create a situation in which They are effectively, psychologically assigned different roles, and they play those out in different ways. They're not eagles and rattlers against one another. They're the robber's cave camp. That's essentially what Sharif did. Week 1, how do we create eagles and rattlers who are tribes at each other's throats? Week 2, how do we create a situation where they maintain their constituent identity but have a larger superstructure identity? So this all leads into why I think, and I hope I don't offend anybody by this, that the worst person in America, the school administrators are like, oh no, please, is Jerry Springer. I will tell you why. Because every single person on that show has had moments of grace, has had moments of kindness, has had moments of tenderness. And he designs a set where they are their worst selves. And he sells commercials against it. It is the exact opposite, literally the exact opposite of what you do here. You design a situation where you say, hey, you 7-year-old, you 13-year-old, here's a crown you're going to achieve. You class, you don't think you can put on this play. You don't think you can be a good lacrosse team. We're going to get there together. You design a situation in which people become their best selves. I spoke at Villanova earlier this year. There's a great line. Villanova is an Augustinian institution. It's a great line that I learned from St. Augustine. Become what you are not yet. I mean, that's what educators do, right? You create a situation where young people can be their best selves together. And what Jerry Springer does, and it's actually instructive, right? I use it not so much to bash him, but as I think an extremely palpable foil. That is a set that is designed for people to be at each other's throats, designed for people to be their worst selves. You can actually do that. Think about your best student. Think about your best student in the Stanford prison experiment. How long does it take he or she to become prisoner or guard in the power of that situation? So I think ultimately what we are trying to do as educators is help students one day design situations for other people. We design a situation for them now, a classroom, a theater, athletic leagues, in which they can be their best selves. But the thing I love about schools is that, you know, in 9th grade, you try out for speech team. In 10th grade, you get your sea legs doing extemp or dramatic interp. Junior, you're co-captain. And now you're the one telling kids 2 years younger, who you were just 2 years ago, you're the one designing a situation where they can be their best. So ultimately, what we do is not just do this for kids. We help kids see themselves doing this for others. I think it's actually one of the great geniuses of education, and American education in particular, is that we are constantly giving kids responsibility for designing situations in which other people are more likely to cooperate, in which other people are likely to be their best selves. It reminds me of this line in Michelangelo, and I'll end with this, and we can have a discussion. He says, you know, the sculptor doesn't create the angel. The sculptor sees the angel in the stone and just releases it, right? And that's what an educator does, right? Looks at this, you know, unformed block and says, I see an angel, and I'm going to help you become that, and then you're going to take flight, and you're going to do that for other people. So it's powerful being in a place where that mission is clear and where the educators lean into it and where the kids so clearly appreciate it. Thank you.
I'm sure we have some questions, and we might have a mic out there, or else speak loudly if you would, but Fire away.
I have a story for you. In my history of 35 years in junior high or middle school, we had a bus driver. You can imagine what junior high bus behavior is like. Every year on his bus route, he would pick out the student that was the biggest bully and make him the captain of his bus. The rules were that he was to make sure that every student on the bus would be safe. This changed the whole life of this student who had been a bully from kindergarten on to his captainship of a junior high bus. So this bus driver, and he even got an award in my school district for his impact on kids, changed this atmosphere like you're talking about in this bus, plus it made the student a leader for the rest of his life.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's a great example, right? That's a great example.
In your work in designing these environments, how do you find your change agents? Or do you look and search for change agents to put in these environments, and how do you find them?
Yeah, it's a great question. So most of our work at IFA, by the way, I'd love to know your name and how you're connected to Blake, and you as well.
Bob Ashman, and I have a son, Ford, who goes to school here.
Okay, great. And you were a middle school teacher here.
No, in a different district, but my husband's 63 Lake Alone.
Okay, got you. Thank you for coming, all of you. How do we, so most of our work is on college campuses, and what we're doing on college campuses is we're nurturing interfaith leaders, right? And so the dimension of diversity that we are most concerned with at Interfaith Youth Corps, you guessed it, right? Blake alums, right? Religious diversity. So we are most interested in identifying students who can create environments, which is a fancy way of saying dialogues, service projects, etc., in which people who orient around religion differently are more likely to cooperate. So when we first started as an organization, we used to create interfaith service projects for students to come to. And then about 5 or 8 years in, we were basically like, we should be helping students create their own service project. There's a great line, never do for people what they can do for themselves, right? And a 19-year-old is perfectly capable of creating creating an interfaith service project that other people can come to. So I'll give you a good example of the kind of environment, like the worst format for an interfaith event is to choose the most polarizing subject possible. Everybody, think of your top 5, and in the world of religion, it's not hard to think about. To find the most fiery preacher from 3 different religions and put him on stage and say, go. And that's basically an interfaith cage match, and it is expressly designed so that those 3 people hate each other more when they're done, and the audiences that they bring are more suspicious of each other walking out. It is a situation designed for distrust. An interfaith service project is a situation designed for cooperation. Why? Because when you're building a house with Habitat for Humanity and you're doing it alongside somebody who's from a different sect than you within your own tradition or from a different religious tradition altogether, but you are doing a common activity that you both admire and that facilitates kind of casual banter, number 1. That's a positive thing. Number 2, it's the kind of activity in which people can easily connect their own faith tradition or experience to the doing of it. Some people are graduate level theological about this, and they're like, well, this part of the Bible says that we should serve in this kind of way. Great. Other people are like, well, we go to the masjid once a year, honestly, but the last time we went, the imam talked about the importance of serving others. Both of those are legitimate things to say. Neither of those things is a statement of doctrinal exclusivity, right? In other words, you can listen to a Christian or a Jew or a Muslim tell you about their religious inspiration to serve, and share your own, and both of you say, wow, I'm really glad I got a chance to share, and I'm really glad I got a chance to listen, and neither of you have effectively taken something away from the other. So that is an interfaith space designed to make it easier for people to cooperate. By the way, you can also design a space where you can have a better discussion about disagreements. A panel with people who you have chosen specifically to throw flames at each other is just going to burn the house down, right? There are other ways to create a space where people can disagree in ways in which they can learn and relate on the deep fundamental differences between religious communities. Yes.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Patel.
Thank you.
My name is Eric Kang. I have a daughter at senior at the Blake School.
Great.
I want to ask you that it's a very thought-provoking and very interesting topic. You said design spaces so students can cooperate with each other, love each other. But from at a high level, should as an educator, should you create a different situation or different spaces where the student can actually experience a variety of style of spaces so that they can be more prepared for the world to be?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'm addressing one of a dozen important dimensions of education, right? So one important dimension of education, I think, is we have 18 people in this class. They come from a range of identities, backgrounds, and views, and we're discussing Huck Finn, or we're discussing Antigone. How do we have a discussion such that people can express their views and learn from each other and go out thinking, you know what, I feel more solid in my view, but I've learned something from this other person, right? So that kind of educational activity, I think, lends itself to an educator asking a question, how do we create a space for cooperation? I think other kinds of activities might lend themselves to other things. So sports is a really interesting example, or competition amongst different types of teams. You want your mock trial team to have a really strong sense of community, right? And you want that mock trial team to do well against other schools. And frankly, at the end of the mock trial competition, you don't want your team to be a jerk. I mean, one of my favorite moments in sports is the handshake afterwards. I think it's unbelievable that these athletes, knock each other around for 3 hours and then hug and handshake afterwards. I find that stunningly beautiful, right? And I think education, there are dimensions of it which work similarly. There's dimensions of it which are competitive, and there's dimensions of it which are cooperative. And I actually think one of the most important things to teach a 17-year-old is how you switch on a dime, right? I mean, you lose the NBA Finals, and 5 seconds later, these 6'9" athletes who have put every single thing they've got into winning that title are hugging each other. I mean, the psychological strength to switch on a dime. Right, so it seems to me, of the variety of things educators are attempting to do in helping students make that switch is probably pretty important.
Good morning, and thank you for coming. My name is Dawn Rollinson, and I'm a parent. And yesterday, my daughter, I said, why don't you practice your viola at recess? She said, no, I don't want to do that. I said, well, I hope you're doing something physically active like your brother always did. And she said, well, I'd like to. I go to the gym. The boys are playing football. I want to play football, but all the girls are standing around. And so now I want to tie it to religion. Many of the world's religions, I'll just mention Catholicism, do not treat women as equals, even though the United States aspires to treat women as equals. So how do we change the culture, much of which is born in religion of all kinds, where women are not peers or equals to men? And it plays out at the recess gymnasium?
Right. I mean, I think that's the easy answer is I don't know. Right? I don't know. And I also think that I think that this is the philosopher Isaiah Berlin, who once said that we live in a society in which a set of values are both incompatible and also incommensurable. And incompatible is a term that we all know, right? And so in youth sports, for example, there is a value of participation. All 15 players on this baseball team should get playing time, and there's a value of excellence. And at some level, it's incompatible. Like, I see this all the time now, right? Because I'm assistant coach on my kids' teams. It's like, all right, it's the last inning. Am I going to field the best 9 kids, or am I going to field the 4 kids who didn't get enough playing time? Incommensurable means these values cannot be compared with each other. So that's a tougher term and concept. But in the Catholic tradition, being a mother and a nun are both viewed very highly, but they're incommensurable. They can't be compared. The reason I bring that up is because I have a lot of respect for religious communities and traditions, and they have evolved in ways that are in which some of those values are not commensurable with values in contemporary society. So let me give you an example. Voluntary poverty. Celibacy. Do you see anything in contemporary society that would value voluntary poverty or celibacy? But religious traditions, Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam, Catholicism, they all have traditions of voluntary poverty and celibacy. Right? I have great respect for those, even though there is no way to take contemporary society, which I also appreciate, and map its set of values onto those. Those things are incommensurable. So, am I crazy about the way some religious traditions treat genders differently? The answer is no. And there's lots of things I don't know. There's lots of things I don't know. Right? The Catholic tradition is 2,000 years old. It is a tradition that is both deeply intellectual and deeply rigorous. Can I ask questions and disagree? Yes. And ought I listen and learn? Probably.
We have time for a few more questions.
Hi, my name is Brian Pure. My wife teaches in middle school. I have 2 kids here. So maybe I'm just late to the party, but your thoughts underscore the importance of how much of a groundswell it is, because creating a space where people cooperate, I mean, watching people cooperate is kind of boring. Jerry Springer is way more entertaining, right? So we're not going to see this on TV, right? We're going to see the sensationalist, fiery exchanges. That just underscores to me how important it is to start here, right, when the kids are young. So it's a million little spaces at the ground level that have to aggregate to societal, I don't know, success at doing this. Yes?
Yes. So yeah, thank you for that. So I hear this with some frequency, which is basically people at each other's throats is exciting, people cooperating is boring, right? And I'd actually like to think of it as an intellectual question, which is to say, let's make this a research question, right? Is there something in the human psyche that wants to watch people be their worst? What is that thing? Is it socialized? Is it neurological? How does that come about, right? What's the other side of it? Are there times when cooperation is actually extremely scintillating? So I think about the images. I mean, there's a gazillion examples, right? But the images of, in the Arab Spring in Egypt, of Christians surrounding Muslims so that they could pray safely in Tahrir Square. That's an image of cooperation. That is burned into my brain, right? I think of the Olympics as alternately, as a kind of highly respectful, friendly competition, but also many, many layers of cooperation. So people on different NBA teams are playing together on the Olympics team, right? People whose home countries are elsewhere, a bunch of hockey players, will play on their home country's team against the United States, where they currently live and reside and live good lives. What a fascinating example of multi-layered identity and cooperation. So I always tell interfaith leaders that we work with on college campuses, back to your question, I'm like, look, your job is not to find boring commonality. Who cares if everybody likes to play tiddlywinks together? That's not exciting, right? What makes the hot dog story work was that 2 beef hot dogs, when you're an outsider at a popular kid's birthday party, is really important, right? So the job of an interfaith leader, the job of an educator is, how do you design a space where inspiring and significant commonality becomes salient? There's all kinds of things always happening, right? How do you design a space where what we can do together matters more than the things that divide us? And by the way, it's not because I'm not interested in the things that are different or that are divisive. It's that I think we build the muscle to engage difference when we figure out, hey, we can work together. There's things that I like about you. There's things that I admire about you. Now I'm going to ask this question about women in the priesthood and Catholicism. Now I'm going to ask this question about gender segregation in mosques, right? Now I'm going to ask these, because you know that it's asked in the context of respect and friendship and learning. But I'm just not convinced that cooperation is always more boring than people at each other's throats. My sense of the genius of this school and the genius of America at its best is that you can have layered identities and they mutually enrich, right? So in other words, I'm an American Muslim. The parts of me that are Muslim make me a better American. The parts of me that are American make me a better Muslim. And I'm not blowing smoke, right? So the acts of mercy are centrally important in Islam. American civil society relies on voluntary service by its citizens. So in following the precepts of Islam that speak to mercy, I am a part of the voluntary sector in American civil society, right? So that's, I think, what we're going for is to encourage people to be their multiple selves, to encourage a reasonable harmony amongst those multiple selves, and to create spaces where it is easier for those people to cooperate with each other when appropriate, right? When appropriate. Time for
one more.
Yes. So why don't we'll do these two and I'll answer the easier one. No, I'm just kidding. I'll see if there's a common theme. So
I'm curious.
What's your name?
Oh, sorry, Devin Alexander. I've got 3 students at Lake, 2 middle schoolers, and one of them actually leads to this question. When you find yourself in a situation where maybe the situation has been designed so that people won't collaborate, and you recognize that as a situation, how do we give kids the tools currently as educators or as parents to do something about that in a productive way, rather than being frustrated or just feeling like you're an outsider, like you said, or how do we sort of say there's a way to flip the script as opposed to just taking this as it is and dealing with it in the way that the designer wants you to?
Yeah, it's a great question.
You were serious. Susan Geller, and I'm a parent of a 7th grader here. So one of my challenges that I've noticed in the work I do in this space is that, at least in America, for the most part, people are more familiar in a Christian context than they are in other religious contexts. And so when you bring people together, you start with the disparity of knowing.
Yeah.
And I find that hard to overcome, and I'm curious about strategies on that.
Yeah, so those are both excellent questions. Neither of them are easy, so I'm gonna have to deal with both of them. So, here's the thing about being an adult, is you have, especially in a space like this, is you have some degree of agency, right? Oftentimes, my guess is many people in this room have some degree of agency, right? You can think to yourself, things aren't going great in my classroom. I'm gonna shift things around. Things aren't going great at work. There's some things that I can do. Now, of course, lots of us have been in other situations in which we're like, this boss is terrible because they have created a situation that dramatically constrains me. So so I don't have the agency to shift things, right? But most adults have some, and lots of kids don't. Right, and so like my 7-year-old, who like I said, is like, mild normal scale anxiety stuff, but he's not the kid that my 10-year-old is, who's just a bull in a china shop. Like my 7-year-old will play out the role that he's assigned, and he will be frustrated by it, and I think increasingly come to recognize Jake is nice here but mean there. But he's 7, right? If the gym teacher's a jerk, doesn't have that much effect on gym class, right? So I often, this is an example of, I wish I was a better parent, right? But because I do have agency. I run an organization. I'm the guy on the stage here, right? I do have some degree of agency. I will often tell my kids, ask the question, what can you do, right? Because frankly, in my life, for the worlds in which I live, there's a reasonable amount. I could have gotten up on this stage and told a bunch of different stories and helped to cultivate a whole different tone and a whole different attitude and a whole different set of thoughts, right? I have that level of agency. My kids don't. Our kids don't. I think the best we can do now, depending on how old your kid is to recognize, hey, Jake is a jerk in 3rd period and not a jerk in 7th period. Do you think it's Jake, or do you think there's something about 3rd and 7th period, right? And one of the things that I do as an educator, I did this yesterday, is it's actually my go-to educational technique is you're in charge. So with the students yesterday, you're in charge, okay? How do you create a school in which people graduate knowing something about the different religions? What do you do? You're in charge. Imagine, what do you do in first year orientation, at school orientation? What do you do at parents' meetings? This is Blake, so we're not going to be just so simple as saying we're going to do a world religions class. Think about the whole school. What are the posters on the walls? What are the extracurricular activities? You're in charge, right? And your students leaned into that, right? They could imagine themselves being in charge, which, by the way, says a lot about your school, right? So first, recognize, and second, imagine. And I think the third thing is, because a place like Blake gives students increasing responsibility, when you're captain of the speech team, when you're captain of the mock trial team, when you're a veteran, what's the first speech you're going to give to the students, right? And one of the positive things about the existence of the Jerry Springers of the world is we recognize the importance of this stuff when we see it go careening off a cliff. When we see how bad it can be, then we're like, oh yeah, actually, creating a team environment in which people get along is really important, and we gotta be, and that doesn't just happen, right? Give me 3 words that reminds me of the disparity in knowledge. Yes. Yeah, there's a chapter on this in my 3rd book out there called Interfaith Leadership, where I kind of tell this fictional story of this Methodist kid and this Muslim kid who become friends, and their friendship kind of causes a whole set of questions about this Methodist kid. Is like, wait a second, if you don't go to church on Sunday, why am I going to church? Basically, the set of questions that often emerges in the encounter of somebody very different. And one of my lines in that chapter is, the Muslim kid says, but your name is never mispronounced in class. Don't forget that, right? Like, let's not pretend we're equal, right? Your name is never mispronounced. You never have to walk into 7th grade thinking to yourself, which, now, it's not the end of the world when your name is mispronounced. I'm 42, I can deal with it, but when I was 13, I walked into Glencoe, I was like, here we go. You know, here we go. By the way, when your name is mispronounced at the beginning of class, you don't think kids notice that and you don't get it on the playground afterwards for like weeks, right? So I think that that's real, right? And I don't know what to do about it. It is what it is. It ought to be acknowledged. I think authorities should acknowledge it and recognize it, probably attempt to do what they can to even the situation, right? But to be very honest, I am glad that my parents were real politic with me about this when I was growing up. They were like, you're gonna have to explain more. Don't pretend it's gonna be the same for you. You're just gonna have to explain more. And that doesn't mean that I am not grateful for the summer camp counselors and the teachers who leaned ever so slightly in my favor to even a situation. I think that there is something to both of those things happening. So I'll tell a quick story, and then I'll let you guys go. I'll shut up. So I was a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford. I went to the University of Illinois. So I get there, you know, and there's a bunch of kids who honestly went to like Blake and Princeton. I didn't go to Blake and Princeton. I went to Glenbard South and U of I, and I was a good student. Those are solid schools. But I get to Oxford. I've never seen a New Yorker in my life. Okay, I don't know that the discipline of political philosophy is a thing, right? And so all of these kids who went to Princeton and Harvard and Yale are talking about, you know, Michael Sandel and Michael Walzer and political philosophers. I'm like, oh man, they were probably right after Voltaire. I've heard of Voltaire. And then somebody was like, when I was walking in Harvard Yard with Michael Sandel, I'm like, what? You know? And then I was really glad. I'm going to be really honest. This is not a nice thing to say. I was really glad that my dad and my mom, when I was 12, were like, it's going to be harder for you. You're going to have to work your butt off. Because there were kids who folded and left. And I didn't. Right? I grew up in Glen Ellen named Eboo. You think that not seeing a New Yorker is going to kill me? Right? If I need to buy a stack of books by Walzer and Sandel, I'm going to buy a stack of books by Walzer. I'm going to do this, right? And so there is a part of, again, I'm fortunate enough to have had both experiences where it's clear that a set of people were like, you're the different one. You're the one that people don't know that much about. I'm going to lean a little bit in your favor. And then there were a set of people, largely my parents, who were like, here's the world. Here's the world, right? Things might be harder for you in Glen Ellen, but let me tell you, you would rather be in Glen Ellen than just about any other place on the planet. And if you need to be head and shoulders better, be head and shoulders better. So both of those things were useful in my life. Thank you.
Eboo, that was terrific. Thank you ever so much. And for those of you that want to spend a little more time with Eboo, he is going to be outside in the hall where he has some of his books for sale, and he will sign them and talk to you more about his topics. Don't forget, we've got some events around the holidays, some hockey, the holiday party, and then we've got some great speakers starting next year, so we hope to see you at all of those. Take care. Have a great day.